And welcome to this edition of the Native News Update on this Thursday, June 28th. I'm your host for today's program, Paul DeMain. And today, joining with us will be correspondent Mark Trahant discussing the Supreme Court decision upholding the Affordable Health Care Act, which includes the Indian Health Service funding. And right afterward, Alaska Public Radio Network News Director Lori Townsend talking about some fishing protests there in Alaska and citations, but also the successful end to another whaling season for some of the Alaska's northern tribal groups. Mark Trahant, thanks for joining with us on the Native News Update today. There was a historic Supreme Court decision this morning on issued on healthcare. Tell us how this it may or may not impact Indian country and what you know about that court decision.
Well, it impacts Indian country in two ways. The first is by upholding the law, they have upheld the Indian Healthcare Improvement Act. As you know, that has just been real problematic to get through Congress. People have blocked it on issues have nothing to do with American Indians and Alaska Natives. So that law is now permanent. We'll never have to go back before the Congress, hat in hand, and say reauthorize it. So that's a big win. Less so was the provisions involving Medicaid. The court said that you can't take away states' money for Medicaid if they don't want to participate in this expansion. Now, the expansion is the real key and heart of the whole law. So it's a big deal. But I think it leaves open a lot of room for using incentives rather than penalties. It uses a lot of other ways that you can accomplish the same thing. So I'm not sure it'll be detrimental in that sense. In one other area, I think opens up a possibility, and that by saying that there will be uneven services by different states based on Medicaid rules, I think it allows the opportunity at least to argue that Indian country ought to get its own Medicaid services directly. In the Affordable Care Act, they have a provision that allows Navajo to be a test case for that and to explore having Medicaid directly. And I think down the road, the argument could be made that Indian country ought to be a 51st state and not have to be subject to 51 different sets of Medicaid rules.
This law was always expected that there was going to have to be modifications for it, but I hear the Republicans are saying they're going to bring up an act to repeal the whole thing as fast as they can.
Right.
Obama's talking about tweaking things after the next election. They're talking about trying to force a vote on this before the next election. What are the political dynamics between Romney, and tell me about the Massachusetts health law as well in your discussion here.
Sure.
Is it all going to be politics between now and November election?
Absolutely. And I think you have to know that what they're saying about repeal and replace is absolute hooey. Romney, who was sponsor of a similar law in Massachusetts, went on and said his first day in office he'll repeal. Nowhere in the Constitution does allow a president to repeal a law. He can defund parts of it. He'll have some flexibility, but he just can't repeal it. The second thing is the House said the week of July 9th, right after the holiday, they're going to try to vote on a repeal bill. But you have to know that it has absolutely no chance in the Senate. The Senate, you need to get 66 votes before you get anywhere. You need to have cloture. And there's just no way that's going to happen. And even if the Republicans sweep the election, they're not going to have that number of votes. They're just not there. And so this is the law of the land. And now it becomes a question of, can we execute and implement this law to the best of its ability? You know, the other part that I think liberals need to be reminded of is that this law is very much a basic small step. We have a long way to go. What's driving this is a real demographic imbalance in this country. There are far more older people than younger people, and that drives up healthcare costs. So we've got to somehow control those costs and bring them into a line, basically what the rest of the world spends.
There's a lot of people who complain about things that haven't impacted them yet. How much of this law has been implemented? And there, like I says, there's people who seem to be against it, and yet it hasn't impacted them yet at all. Where are we at with the implementation?
Oh, most of the law doesn't begin until 2014. Although Indian country, the Indian Health Care Improvement Act began immediately, and IHS has been looking for ways to implement it, beginning with very deep conversations with tribal leaders about how to implement that part of the law.
Okay, and it does, and this provides the funding capability and structure for future funding of Indian Health Service. Is that how?
It's an authorization law, so it allows the future funding. It allows more collection of data, a better collection of data. It allows more preventative services such as diabetes to spend money up front rather than when people are sick, which in general the law does, by the way.
Mhm. And it seems to me that with the implementation and more people being provided with insurance, that will also benefit Indian Health Service in terms of distributing the cost factors perhaps a little bit more broadly.
Right, right. I mean, every preventive dollar saves money down the road. We know that with certainty. So yes, that allows that to happen more often.
But we'll also give people an option to be able to go to their local city hospital and things like that. So there's some choice that gets built into these insurance policies.
Well, and it's important to remember that tribes operate both as governments with members and also as employers. And the rules will be different for tribes in dealing with their own members and dealing with employers. With the tribes as employers, they'll be able to participate in state exchanges and to be able to cut some of their healthcare costs as well.
Okay, sounds good. Anything else we need to know about this today?
I wonder if John Roberts just reelected Obama.
I hear it's going to be all politics on this particular thing from now until November, so we'll maybe hear a lot about it yet.
I think it would be really healthy if we reopen the very nature of this healthcare debate, and in particular that you haven't heard a lot of Republican options. It's been, let's get rid of this without what's next. We are on an unsustainable course, and when you talk about the budget deficit, you're really talking about healthcare. And if we can fix this one thing, the rest of the budget deficit goes away. This is that big.
Okay, well, thanks for joining with us. We'll keep an eye on it and bring you back in as things move along. Thanks for joining with us. Welcome to the Native News Update. Lori, thanks for joining with us. Give us a quick report on some of the things that are going on up your way up in Alaska.
Well, hi, Paul. It's good to talk with you again. We have had a really poor salmon run in Alaska. The Chinook salmon run has been very, very bad in numerous rivers, and it's quite concerning. They've closed subsistence fishing on the Kuskokwim River, the Yukon River. They just closed the Little Susitna River. They're considering the Deshka River. And so we've got rivers all throughout the state that they're closing the runs on because of a lack of what are called escapement goals. So many fish have to get to Canada to make sure that they also get enough fish, and it's just not happening. So they've shut down subsistence fishing, and people on the Kuskokwim River, Yupik people from the Bethel area out in that region, southwest Alaska, went fishing anyway. They said, look, we need to fish. This is our food for the winter. How would you like it if somebody shut down your store, Walmart, or the grocery store for a week? That's what it is for us, is we have to go get this fish when we can. We can't wait. And so they went fishing anyway. And law enforcement came out there, seized nets, cut nets up in front of people. They seized more than 1,000 pounds of fish. Senator Mark Begich is now planning to be out there to meet with people to see what's going on. He's also asked Ken Salazar not to cut funding to the subsistence management program. He said we need more money to make sure that this program is managed properly. But the bigger issue is the lack of returns, and that's a real problem.
Which is a historic trend. I mean, number one, you have treaties with Canada. You have a certain problem with fish moving out and coming back in, which they've been fighting in Oregon and Washington for years. They're trying to increase the returns that have been destroyed from dams or logging silt and all those kinds of things. What do you see going on in the near future in regard to this? Obviously, people just going to be sent to jail and lose their fishing equipment, or?
Well, they're issuing citations, and that will remain to be seen if people just ignore them and end up possibly going to jail, or if this will be worked out somehow. Last year, there was some problems on one of the rivers where they realized that one of the counters was malfunctioning. That's certainly not the case this year, because we're seeing these poor runs all across the state. But I think that we're looking at something that is going to take a lot of work to try to resolve, primarily because no one really knows why this is happening. Biologists are saying it's in the ocean, it's not in the rivers, that things are fine in the conditions in the rivers. It's out somewhere in the ocean that things are going wrong. My brother, a commercial fisherman in southeast Alaska, said just yesterday, I talked to him, he's coming back in from being out for weeks, and he said he went through miles of Chatham Straits and didn't see anything, no small little fry in the water, and he's been fishing for more than 30 years. He said usually in years past he would see krill on top of the water and the whales just feeding like crazy. He said last year he saw a krill that was just like a red mat. And in years past, quite some years ago, he said he hasn't seen this in a long time, herring, schools of herring where the surface would be just flipping fish everywhere. He doesn't see those things any longer. And he said this year in particular was very startling in the lack of any kind of life. He said just going for miles and seeing blank water. And he said he's used to going through areas where there'll be a little cold stretch and you won't see anything, and then you get to warmer waters and there's fish. But he said he saw nothing for hours and hours and hours. So it's very concerning, and it's going to take a lot of work to kind of track this back and see why this is happening.
Why it's happening, and actually looking at the impact of what's going on in those native communities that use the food for subsistence. You said that there was also a whale hunt coming to an end up there. Was that a successful year for them?
Absolutely, and so that's a good story. We've got some very serious concerns over salmon, and certainly concerns for our friends and relatives in rural Alaska who are going to be hurting this year because of a lack of fish. But the folks who went out whaling had great success this year. The last count I heard was at least 15 whales up north, and they've been having their last Nalakatuk, or whale distribution of meat and celebration of the harvest festival. So Nalakatuk is going on right now. I think the last one's either today or tomorrow in Barrow. And it's a great time for people to get together, get some whale meat, and have a lot of fun.
What's the organization affiliated with the whale hunt up there? A tribe or a group or villages, or how would you call it?
Well, the Alaska Eskimo Whaling Commission is a consortium of 12 villages up on the coast, and they get a certain allocation through the International Whaling Commission each year of so many strikes, so they can take so many whales, and they allocate those to the different villages. So it's all quite regulated, and the bowhead whale count for Alaska is increasing about 3%, I believe, every year. So it's a very sustainable hunt, and they're having good success with it.
Oh, well, that's good. A kind of a balanced report between some problems and here's some successes. So if I get up there in the next 24 hours, I might be able to get a little bit of that mukluk?
Muktuk, yes.
Muktuk. Right.
Mukluk is what you wear on your feet. Muktuk is what you eat.
Wouldn't make a very good Alaskan native.
I have a friend bringing some muktuk back from Barrow tomorrow, so that'll be great fun. I've got friends that I can bring it to, and they'll be very happy to get some.
Okay. Thanks, Laurie, for joining with us. Take care.
Thanks, Paul.
And that is another roundup of news from Indian Country on this edition of the Native News Update. Join with us with Kimberly Acosta, and hopefully next week some reports on some of those 33 fires out west.